Welcome to Read It and Eat It in the Library. My name is Cheryl Sikora, and this is the podcast where we talk about three of my favorite things: books, food, and public libraries. Joining me today is Kristine Knourek. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Kristine is very active in the Lloydminster community in her volunteer life. She is an important professional in our community, and she is the board chair of Lloydminster Public Library. So today we are talking about Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. It is a super fun, classic Canadian book that almost everybody loves. And it features Anne Shirley, who is an orphan who joins up with Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert. They want to adopt an orphan to help on the farm. They're dead set on getting a boy. But when Matthew goes to the train station to find their boy, it's Anne that's there. And they quickly fall in love with high-spirited and adventurous and talkative Anne, as do the rest of us readers. And it's a series of 7 books, I think?
I think it's 8.
8
yeah,
books.
I think it's 8.
And so this is the first one, and her adventures in PEI at the age of about between 10 and 16-ish. So Anne has a talkative streak.
She does.
She has a ton to say about almost anything and a flair for words. One of the first quotes that caught my attention in the book is, "If you have big ideas, you have to use big words to express them, haven't you?"
Agree.
Me too. I love big words, not to be pretentious, not to be condescending, but just it's part of the fun of language.
It is part of the fun of language, and I agree with you. I also learned very early on as a reader and a word nerd that if you mispronounce something, don't make fun of somebody because they likely learned it or sounded it out in their head while they were reading. So don't make fun of it, which I also quite like within the spirit of language and big words. How many times have we mispronounced big words that you see in writing that you learn how they're pronounced after the fact?
Is there a word that you mispronounce?
Yes, I always mispronounce Connecticut.
Ah, yes.
I pronounced it phonetically like it was written out. I pronounced it Connecticut. But when I said it verbally out of my mouth and somebody corrected me, they were very kind about it. I was a young child when I was reading this, and they were very, very sweet about it. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I learned if you mispronounce a word, it's because you likely learned it by reading, not by hearing it.
Mine is mahogany instead of mahogany.
Oh gosh, I didn't know that one.
And
There's my first learning of the podcast.
and Penelope instead of Penelope.
Interesting. Okay. We love it.
So when Anne meets Matthew, she asks him, "Would you rather be divinely beautiful, dazzlingly clever, or angelically good?"
What would my clever? Because I think if you're clever, then you can convince people of your goodness and also figure out a way to improve your looks if being beautiful is something that's important.
That's an excellent answer. I also would choose dazzlingly clever.
Dazzlingly clever.
Because I think that I'm with Anne in that if there's a little bit of spice to you, you're much more interesting.
You are more interesting, I agree. And that also tends to get refined with age, having more sassiness. My late grandma was always very sassy and very powerful and very had a lot of presence as a lady, and I think that just grew and grew and grew and grew as time went on. She really leaned into it.
So Anne tries to convince Marilla when they first meet. She says, "You could call me Cordelia." And Anne's like, or Marilla says, "But like, is that your name?"
Yeah.
And, well, no, but you could call me Cordelia. When you played pretend as a child, did you have a name that you always picked?
Always. My sister and I would play all sorts of imaginary games, but usually we would tend toward playing like Mary and Joseph from the Nativity.
Yes.
So for some reason, I always wanted to be called Mary, which is also like doubly hilarious because my mom's actual legal name is Mary, but she doesn't go by Mary. She doesn't like that name. So it's just quite funny when I think back on that as an adult and think, gosh, I wonder what my mom thought about that. And it wasn't because it was a particularly like gorgeous romantic name by any means. I just always wanted to be Mary in the play.
I love that. I liked hyphenated names, and so I picked Leanne, but
yeah.
it was Lea hyphen Anne with an E.
Oh, Anne with an E, good.
Definitely Anne.
The way it
with
needs to be spelled.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because I thought that was like, even though Leanne is not at all French, I thought like hyphenated was like a fancy French thing
Beautiful.
to do.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Love it.
Anne has a couple of imaginary friends, Katie, Maurice, and Violetta. I did not have a very active imagination when I was a child, so I didn't have any imaginary friends, but my oldest daughter, Ella, did. She had an imaginary friend named Kimmy, and Kimmy was always incredibly mean to her.
No.
And Ella she liked being dramatic and just being like, she was treated poorly. Like, this is unjust.
Yes.
And so Kimmy regularly had to be asked to leave.
Good.
And one day I had enough of this, and so I opened the front door and I invited Kimmy to leave, and I yelled at her as she went down the driveway. Yeah, I did. And then I told her she was never to return.
Yep.
Because I was sick of her being mean to my child.
Absolutely. Good.
And she never came back.
No, she did. I love it.
Oh, poor Ella. Did you have imaginary friends?
No, I didn't either. I'm with you, Cheryl. I didn't actually have an imaginary friend. However, I use my imagination with lots of my toys and my stuffies, which I'm sure a lot of our audience can relate to. In addition to, I had a blanket that I just loved. I had it since I was not even 1 year old. I was just a young baby when I got this blanket that became my favorite blanket of my life. And when I was probably around like 10 or 11, I sort of personified my blanket and like made it a face and like made it a necklace and I just did all this crazy stuff with it. But then I still wanted to cuddle it and sleep with it at bedtime. So then that all just got, ripped apart. But I don't remember what I named the blanket at that point. I think I was just called a blanket or blankie. But no, I didn't have like a separate figure of my imagination. I always just imagined that my toys and my comfortable things of my life were alive and that they would come to life after I was gone.
Fun. I'm an only child, and I was born when my mom was quite young, so there wasn't a lot of children to play with. So I was a very practical child. Like, I had Barbies, but they didn't play house. I would just dress up on this, and then if I was going to a ball, they would look like this or whatever. And so I missed an imagination step there, but yeah. So this book has chapter titles. Each title has a very practical title, and I kind of loved that.
Yes. You know what to expect. There's no surprises in that because I think the actual meat of the chapters is where the magic happens. So it starts out with, I guess, the basic facts, and then your imagination goes wild from the very beginning to the very end of the chapter. I like that too.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Very unique.
Mm-hmm. So Anne says, there's such a lot of different Annes in me. I sometimes think that is why I'm such a troublesome person. If I was just the one Anne, it would be ever so much more comfortable. But then it wouldn't be half so interesting. Mm-hmm. I think she's got a super great point.
I agree with you. There's so many layers to us as people, and as a woman, I can certainly relate. Anne was 11 years old in the book when she said that, and I think that's a very profound and insightful comment to make, because I'm finding that as life goes by and as we unveil different components of becoming who we are and shedding also away things that don't serve us anymore, that the many layers of Kristine, the many layers of Cheryl, they come and go. and sometimes, like I'd referred to my late grandma earlier, the sharpness comes bit by bit in certain areas, and it's for a reason, and it's on purpose. And I think Anne you're right, she was onto something there. I wouldn't want to just be one Kristine and one Kristine only. I think that would be boring. I want to be all of me all the time and in different ways as it makes sense for me to be myself. So.
And different people bring out different parts of you. And every time there's like a personality quiz or any sort of scoring that has a quadrant, in general, it's very common for people to be adjacent. If you're strong in one, great. If you're strong in two, they're probably adjacent. Mm-hmm. I'm almost always opposite.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So then that led, when I did, there's a quadrant-based career, I was opposite. And my career options that they recommended were appliance repair technician or florist.
Wow. So creative and methodical, hands and heart, right? That's interesting. Yeah.
So I have no desire to be either of those things, but it's a fun idea.
I love it.
The dresses with puffed sleeves, and Marilla is so practical, and the dresses that she prepares are serviceable and functional.
Practical.
Yes. But she just wants the puffed sleeves. And it's one of my favorite parts where Matthew goes to the store and he's having a heck of a time getting his words out and just explaining what he wants, but he feels so strongly that she too should have the puffed sleeves. Was there any sort of fashion trend or thing that you always wanted?
Oh gosh, well, I was a teenager in the late 90s, and the big bell-bottomed kind of wide-legged jeans were so cool when I was in junior high and then into high school. And I think my parents thought they were just kind of silly and kind of, that's just a fad, like that's not going to last, whatever else. And I remember when I got my first pair and saved up all my babysitting money and, went and got this, pair, that I was just so excited. And it was probably extravagant, just like puff sleeves. Like, who needs all this material on your legs? This is so silly. Just like Marilla with the puff sleeves, right? What a waste. Oh, it's so extravagant. You don't need this much fabric on your shoulders. But those are they were some kind of symbol, I think, to me of some way of being as a young teenager and as a middle-aged teenager, thinking, I just want to be cool. Mm-hmm. It's all that mattered at that when you were 14 years old or 15 years old. You just wanted to be cool.
For me, it was the hammer pants.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
And I never did get them. I borrowed a pair from a friend once, and my family was not at all happy with it, and they gave me so much grief that it just took out the fun of it. So I did not pursue them anymore, and I promptly gave them back to my friend.
Oh
but
my gosh.
The hammer pants.
Yep.
Yeah, super great stuff. So bosom friends, Diana and Anne. I really, really love the joy that they have for each other and how they celebrate each other's successes and are just, to have that at such a young age is pretty cool.
Yes, it's very rare, I think, and it's so interesting. I think about Anne and Diana, and I thought about that even being a young girl first reading through the series of books. I've read through this series multiple different times in my life. It's a favorite for a reason. They're each other's champion. And they're so unique and different and such an interesting balance for one another. And you can tell that Anne sort of pushes Diana in certain ways where she's uncomfortable. And at the same time, excites Diana and ignites passion in her and ignites imagination. And they just have the most beautiful girlhood together, rambling around PEI. What a dream. I love that they're kindred spirits. I always think about that space with those girls, just having that bosom kindred spirit that you can just trust and talk all night long with and just give your heart to, and that she'll care for it and she'll just love you for you. It's so powerful. It's such a powerful representation of friendship.
It is. And like you said, very rare.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts about that the two of them together is when Anne's planning on hating Diana's husband.
Yes.
She just can't imagine sharing Diana with anybody else.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably true.
So
it would
true.
be hard for Anne, and it would be hard for Diana's husband.
Yes, absolutely. She'd be jealous. Jealous in a different way.
Absolutely.
Of Diana's affection.
So Anne says that next to trying and winning, the best thing is trying and failing. And I just think that that's such a profound lesson, and another profound lesson that she learns. She has so much to say, and you just think that everything that is going on in her brain is coming out her mouth. But she's really a thinker too.
She is a thinker. I agree with that, Cheryl. In addition to the fact that she's got such a way of articulating, but you just know that Anne probably has 1 million thoughts, but only says maybe like 10 or 12. But she spends such a long time expressing them and like really adding color to what she's feeling, why she's feeling it, why she thinks what she thinks, and spends so much time in a good way explaining herself that it's just a fraction of probably what's going on upstairs.
I think some of the fails, at least in my professional career, have been the more memorable lessons. I remember a couple of years ago when I was putting my resume together and I was trying to kind of sum up some of my professional accomplishments from over the years, and I'm like, well, I did this, I brought this in, and I'm like, yeah, but that didn't work out. And then another thing that I worked really hard about, developing and conceiving and bring, and that didn't work out either. And I could think of so many things that I was so proud of that, well, I tried this and it didn't work out, but it was still really great.
Yes.
And that's probably why the next 3 ideas did work out, because of the lessons that I learned there.
Yeah, you just said that exact word that popped into my mind, Cheryl, and it's lessons. In failure, what's the lesson? And I know that Anne always talked about getting into scrapes. I love that. She wasn't speaking about scraping her knee. It's like getting into trouble, making mistakes. I always get in scrapes. And it seems like she just lived that every day, always making mistakes. But Miss Stacy, her teacher, would always say, tomorrow is fresh with no mistakes in it. And that really resonated with Anne, because you could tell she just had this, almost this kind of burden of like, oh, I just need to be perfect. I need to be angelically good. Then Marilla will really love me if I'm just the perfect girl, if I just listen and I do all these things. But it's just not in her nature. It's not in her nature at all. It's in her nature to fail, air quotes, fail. You're not failing by being yourself or by getting in scrapes. You're just experiencing life. What a good reminder, hey? It's awesome.
And Marilla and Matthew both love her quite deeply because of that.
Of who she is, yeah.
Of Matthew regularly tells her, like, don't change everything.
Yes, absolutely. Cherish that and celebrate it.
Do any of the characters remind you of any of your family members?
Yeah, it's so funny. I was thinking about this too, and I always chuckle when I think of Rachel Lynde. She's like the town gossip, and she just is so nosy. She always has an opinion about something, and she's got to get in people's business and just find out the facts. She doesn't remind me necessarily of somebody in my family or in my personal life, but she just reminds me of everybody who exists that's like that in town. Like in any town, in any city, no matter what, there's always a Rachel Lynde. There's always somebody who knows what's up. And if they don't know, they're going to find out at the coffee party or at dinner or, wherever they're going, they're going to find out. But one that really reminds me of someone in my family is Matthew, of course. He's such a gentle, introverted, layered gentleman farmer. And my late grandpa, I spoke about my grandma, who is the spicy, kind of sassy and really powerful lady. Opposites attract. And grandpa was very just genteel and loving and calm and peaceful and sweet, very organized, very prepared. Not that grandma wasn't, but she was the boss. And he loved it. And he partnered with her, and they were true equals, and truly a family. So my late grandpa reminds me a lot of Matthew and the way Matthew's depicted in the book. Always loving, always hardworking, very kind, very thoughtful, very sweet. The puffed sleeves of my life would have been when my grandpa was trying to help me in the wintertime. I was getting babysat by Grandma and Grandpa on the farm, and my mom was away at work, and I wanted to carve her this heart out of like a piece of packed snow, and I just couldn't manage it. Like, I had my big mittens on, and I think I was like 5 years old and trying to like fix this, fashion this little heart for my mom, and I just couldn't get it, and I was crying, and Grandpa was coming over, and what are you trying to do? What's the matter? And helped me obviously carve this little heart. And I remember we took it home, gave it to Grandma. She put it in the freezer until my mom came back from work. So that's like the puffed sleeves of my life with my grandpa, just seeing something that mattered to me at that moment and making it happen. So special. It's one of my most cherished memories of him.
Matthew reminds me of my grandpa too, a man of few words, but
all the right ones.
Absolutely. And he, when he did speak, you really listened.
Yeah.
He just commanded attention.
Yes.
Maybe more so than Matthew, but he reminds me. But I love Marilla.
I do too. Marilla's powerful in her own right, and she's a no-nonsense girl, and I love that about her.
And I love how she, near the end, she realizes that there is nothing holding her back except herself.
What a powerful lesson.
That, yes, it's okay to be prim and it's okay to be proper. And sometimes she just wants to tell Anne that she loves her.
Yep.
But she doesn't want to spoil her.
No.
But then eventually she learns, that's okay.
Yeah, and that's part of the beauty of life. And I think that Anne drew that out of Marilla, and Marilla didn't even realize she needed that, and that she was craving that chance to love and to be loved back in that very special way, in that special relationship that they have as adopted mom and adopted daughter. Just a very profound healing went on, I think, in Marilla because of Anne's presence in her life.
Absolutely. Another of my very favorite characters is Gilbert.
Oh, of course. Gilbert forever.
Oh, goodness. So I just love him. Anne has to work so very hard to forgive him. At the beginning of the book, he jiggles her pigtail and says, carrots, carrots, carrots. And she's very sensitive over her red hair.
Yep.
And she just gets a hate on for him. And then he saves her.
Yep.
And then he asks for forgiveness, and she says no. And almost immediately, she realizes, well, that was a bad choice. But her grudge, she just can't get over that grudge. And until the very end where he asks again. It's a tear-jerking scene.
Yes, it is.
For me. But how are you with grudges?
Oh, great question. I don't know that I necessarily hold grudges deeply. However, I really think through forgiveness. And I think that they're inextricably linked in terms of forgiveness and the ability to truly forgive and forget, and not hold a grudge or nurse a grudge. I struggle with that, the forgiveness part sometimes, because I don't want to be hurt. And I think very similar to Anne, where she has a million thoughts going on all the time and maybe only articulates 10 or 12 of them, but articulates them fully. She's got a lot going on and wants to protect herself because it's her own internal world. And I think very similarly, I don't want to be hurt either. I don't want to put myself out there and possibly be hurt or made fun of or teased or disappointed or whatever it may be. So I'm very mindful of forgiveness, and if I do forgive, there is intentionality, and then I do try to forget. Sometimes one's more difficult than the other, but I am mindful of trying to not hold a grudge, because I think that the grudge space is a space of criticalness and of bitterness and bias that can really seep in and impact the way that we go through the world.
Very interesting assessment. I don't personally hold a lot of grudges. I'm generally against people.
Mm-hmm.
But businesses or restaurants, I will something will happen and I'll have poor service and we are never going there again. We are never. And then somebody will say, oh, how about this place? And I'm like, I never go there. And then they'll say, why? And been so long that I cannot
remembered.
articulate why.
Yep.
We just never go there. Was there anything in particular the last time you reread the book that caught your attention differently than it might have in other times?
Yes. The last time I'd say I reread one of the books was probably at least 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. So a good long time ago in terms of what I consume and how I move through the world and what I take in terms of reading. I really noticed Lucy Maud Montgomery with her very, very descriptive language, and Anne's descriptive language of, I think she called it the Whispering White Way, where her and Matthew were going in the wagon coming home from the train station where she was getting picked up, and he's like, oh, this is just the laneway, or whatever he called it, some colloquial, this is just very practical farmer language, right? And she says, oh no, I would call it the Whispering White Way because it's so beautiful with the blossoms and the fragrance and this and this. And I really noticed her romancing of everything, like language, nature, food, the way she looks, and she was making fun of herself, or she's not thinking she's beautiful, or conversely thinking Diana's so beautiful with her raven black hair and her alabaster brow. She's very beautifully descriptive, and I quite liked that. I've always been drawn to that in language and been drawn to that in this series, and I think it's part of the reason that I keep going back and back and back to it over and over again, is the romance of language, because sometimes the world is hard, and sometimes we go through hard things as well, and it's just nice to have a break and hear something beautiful and read something beautiful.
Absolutely. I really was caught by the descriptions of nature this time around, about the different kinds of trees and how they interact, and this one's better for shade and this one's better for the smell. And I think I probably glossed over that in my previous readings because I didn't really know the difference between all these trees, and now just with more experience I have a better idea of that's what this tree looks like, that's what this tree, so I could visualize it more in my head.
Yep.
So yeah, I really like that.
Me too.
All right, well, let's try some food. Okay, well, on to part 2, the food portion. There was a wealth of food choices that we could have had. They ate boiled pork and greens, which I had no desire to try.
No thanks.
But there was raspberry tarts, fruit cake, raspberry cordial.
Oh my gosh.
Of course, which was actually
Classic.
black currant wine. Jellied chicken. Cold tongue, whipped cream and lemon pie, plum pudding with sauce. Much of this was served at one meal when the minister came.
Yep. Always bring out all the gorgeous foods for
Absolutely.
the minister.
So one of the things that the minister was served was baking powder biscuits. So that's what I've made for you today.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Baking powder biscuits are super simple. They almost always turn out perfectly if you are in a good mood and gentle with them. And they just cook right up. I just made these on my lunch break today.
Oh my gosh.
And then we also have 3 kinds of jelly, because preserves were a very big thing during this time period, of course, but also in the book. So these are jams and jellies that I actually made myself.
Wow.
So this one is a spiced crabapple jelly. The crabapples were grown in my backyard. This one is called Heavenly Jam, and it features apples from my backyard and pears from the grocery store. And then this one is crab apples from a different tree
Wow.
in my backyard. And so I used to do a lot of canning just to get us through the long, cold winter. But then I realized, there's really only so many jellies that one family needs.
Can eat.
And I am an unpredictable canner because I don't have a lot of patience, and sometimes time is a factor. And so as you can see, these all should be the same consistency, and they're completely not.
Oh gosh.
And I could never really get the knack of the good clear jelly. I was never going to be winning any prizes with my jelly, but it's tasty nonetheless. So anyways, let's give it a try.
Let's give it a try. Well, it looks fantastic, and I can tell you that I'm impressed by food on a regular basis, and I am not a canner or a baker. I like cooking, but
Okay.
they look very beautiful, and I wouldn't have noticed that their consistency is not proper, air quotes. I would say they all are varied, and that was on purpose.
There you
So
go.
well done. Well
There
done,
you
you.
go.
Very good.
Well, I think I'm
Fantastic.
going to go with just the regular crabapple jelly.
I want to try a little bit of each. I'm going to cut some pieces of biscuit and try it all. You know, there's something also very, very sustaining and very hearty about a good baking powder biscuit. You can eat it with everything.
Absolutely. I had them fresh out of the oven today with my Thai coconut green chili soup, and
Yes.
it was fantastic.
Just delicious, right? My partner had surgery a couple years ago, and that's one of the things I made was homemade hamburger soup and biscuits. And he doesn't remember anything about me picking him up from the hospital or anything that happened after the fact, but he remembers eating soup and biscuits, but not how many helpings he asked for because he was apparently very hungry.
Oh, that's super sweet.
And baking powder biscuits were one of the items that I made.
Love it.
Okay, I'm going to try the Heavenly Gem. Pear and apple. Wow. Beautiful. See, the consistency I think is gorgeous. Lovely. Very, very nice.
So in my backyard, when we moved to that house many years ago, it was completely bare. And so we hired a designer because it's a very large backyard, and she made the plan of what to plant where.
Yep.
And we said that we wanted a lot of fruit trees. And we were early 20s when we moved there. And so we just went with her recommendation. And so we have 3 crabapple trees and 1 apple tree. That's what we started with, and then we've since added. So we probably have 10 or 15 fruit trees.
Wow.
But 3 crabapple trees for the first 5 years was completely manageable.
Right.
And it has been 20 years now, and 1 crabapple tree is completely unmanageable. It's just way too much of a little fruit, and we have multiple kinds of crab apples, and just
We always forget that, don't we? Guess what happens to trees? They grow.
yeah, it's a thing. It's a
Absolutely.
thing. But we've since now we have 2 kinds of cherry trees in our yard, and those are pretty fantastic.
Lovely. And this is the spiced crabapple you said?
Yes.
I'm going to try this next. And what's the spice? Do I need to guess? Okay. That could be fun.
You know, I'm not even sure what it is. but
It smells kind of like a nutmeg, kind of a warming spice type flavor.
When I tasted it, I thought it kind of reminded me of mulled wine a little bit. So it must be nutmeg and allspice and cinnamon and those kind of things.
Yum. A little bit of clove, ground clove.
Yes.
Delicious. Fantastic.
So Anne struggles to bake because she can't really follow a recipe because her imagination always gets the best of her. How do you feel about baking?
Well, I referenced my partner earlier, and I would say the same thing. My mom says the same thing to me. My sisters say the same thing about me. I'm not a baker, and that's okay. I hold that very true to myself because I don't have the patience for baking, and I'm not an introverted personality who's very much a rule follower around form and function and reading and following instructions. So no, I'm not a baker, but I'm a great cook because I can just play and have fun and riff and add more garlic than it needs, and it's all okay in the end. It's all okay. But I'm not a baker.
There is a science to it.
There is a science to it, isn't there, right?
Absolutely.
The art of cooking and the science of baking. And my mother's a beautiful baker, and she loves to follow the recipes, and she does a beautiful job, and she would win red ribbons, and she would make jelly with no spots,
clarity.
with the perfect clarity, exactly, and get the blue ribbon at the fair, but it's not for me. I love eating it. Trust me, this is wonderful, but I'm not a good baker.
I have to be, like I mentioned before, in the right mood.
Yeah.
Baking with love is a big deal for me. If I am not feeling it, if I do not want to be doing it, if I'm forced, if I've had an argument or I'm frustrated with something, I've just learned there's no
Not for you.
forcing it.
Yep.
There is no point forcing it because 9 times out of 10, if I am not baking with love, I am baking for the garbage can.
Oh, yeah, that's honest. Yeah. See, and I like that, right? Because like when the spirit so moves, sometimes I find cooking is just the most perfect release of of the day or of whatever it is. And there is a lot of order to cooking, and the methodology and just the precision of things with the knife and the glass of wine and something bubbling on the stove. And I really do quite like the romance of that. But it's something that I can control a little bit on my own time and pace. And somehow, again, I still won't ruin something if I add a little more garlic than it calls for. Whereas
Totally
baking,
fair.
that's not the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm going to try this last jelly too. The crab apple round two looks amazing, Cheryl. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Very good.
Which one was your favorite one?
Like a true foodie, I'll tell you, I like them all for various reasons. Beautiful. I love a bright crab apple. I like the spice that's going on, the warmth in the spiced jelly. And then the heavenly or the dream jelly with the apple and the pear is just very sunshiny. Lovely. Very nice. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So the third portion of our podcast is where we talk about public libraries. Yeah. What's your favorite part of Lloydminster Public Library?
What a great question. I think probably it's pretty honest to say I don't have one favorite part, but if I had to sum up thematically, I would say it's what happens to my senses in Lloydminster Public Library. And what I mean by that is I love how it sounds. I love how I see colors and crafts and kids and adults and teenagers and every component of our community coming together in unique and creative ways. I love touching the books and touching things in the crafting cupboard and borrowing new and unique items to me and seeing others do the same. So it's the sensuality and the engagement of my senses that I love most about Lloydminster Public Library, because it certainly evolved in terms of its offerings in that space. So that's my favorite thing.
There are many things that I love about the public library, or Lloydminster Public Library, but I think today my favorite is the book return, the book sorter. I love shoving my book in there. When we do the walkabouts and we collect the books that people have perused but not chosen, we scan them through because we record the statistics of in-house use. Mm-hmm. And so when I go and it's my turn to do the walkabout and I get my pile of 5 books or 10 books, I'm so excited to just shove them through the sorter and then run around and see if they got sorted properly on the other side.
Yeah, and the sound of it, right? When
That is the favorite part of the tours when the school kids come. We always save that to the end because they are very excited to see the back end of the book sorter.
It's magic.
Yeah. So were you an avid library user as a kid?
I was. I fell in love with public libraries when I was a little child, and I was probably even younger than I was. Well, not younger than I was when I had my blanket that I referenced before because I was a baby. But I remember going to the public library when I think I was maybe 4 years old. Like I was just a little girl, and we went to this program called Story Hour. And it was just a fun time with the librarians in the town I was raised in, where we would have crafts and have a little thematic snack and read a book, and of course then get your library card and borrow books. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with reading. I fell in love with curiosity and the exploration of words, and also leaned into being nerdy, even though I was really quite teased about that when I was younger and when I was teenage. But now I look back on that and I think, oh, that made me who I am. I always loved being in the library as well when I was a teenager because it's someplace I felt safe. I felt very safe there and very, very much like I belonged. And that's an important emotion to experience as a human being.
We work really hard for that here.
Yeah.
My favorite part as a kid, well, I have many favorite parts again, but I loved that I could take out however many books I wanted. Yeah. Because at the school library, you got 1, maybe 2, and you got to go to the library once a week. Like, I will finish that
it's not enough
by tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a rereader. And so it was very frustrating to me that the school library, like, there's books to be read and I can't have them. So I was always very excited to have my bag of books and my arms full of books and my mom carrying the books and,
as many as you can handle.
The library ladies just like, see you in a couple days. And I'm like, yeah, you will. Yeah, I love that. What are you currently reading?
Oh, well, this might be hotly debated whether I'm reading it or I'm listening to it, but I choose to believe that an audiobook is still consuming a book.
Of course
because
it is.
I drive a lot for my job, so I've really taken a shine to audiobooks. So currently I'm listening to the autobiography of Cher, the singer, and it's very, very interesting and insightful, and I love everything about an autobiography. I love hearing about these interesting individuals and their story, and in this case with Cher, her family lineage and everything she went through, and her trajectory into fame and meeting Sonny Bono and having her child Chaz, and just everything that she experienced as, well, really quite a young lady when she became a singer. So it's very good. And question, the title of the book, what do you think it's called?
I have no idea.
Cher.
Of course.
It's called Cher.
Of course.
Yeah, I thought, what else could this possibly be called? Of course it's Cher.
I love that.
Me too.
I firmly believe that audiobooks count as reading. It's not a different kind of reading. It's just reading.
Yeah.
There is a YouTuber that I follow that says, well, when you sit down with your parents and they're reading to you, you're reading along. You're listening. That's reading. Your first experience, probably the experience that made you love reading, was not your eyes decoding the words on the page.
That's right. Good point.
And that was reading.
Mm-hmm.
So I firmly believe the audiobooks count.
Good.
In exactly the same way.
Me too. Well, yes, good. We're on the same page.
Are you a rereader?
Yes, I am a rereader. It's so interesting. I've thought about this a couple different times because, like you said, there's so many books in the world and there's so many interesting, curious topics to explore, and we'll never read them all or learn it all. And it's just part of actually the charm of the whole thing. But there's a comfort and a nostalgia that I have in going back to trusted books. It's the same as trusted movies or trusted songs that I think, I just need to feel that again, or I want to go and revisit that, or have the experience that I did when I was watching that part of the movie or that part of the show. There's a comfort and a predictability in it, and it's interesting because statistically, there was a study released after 9/11 happened around TV consumption and, the sitcom. And what they found was that in 2001, shortly after 9/11, that nostalgia hit really hard. So shows that had typically seen a bit of a decline actually had a resurgence. And one of the shows that had a resurgence around that time was Friends. Because it was still on the air. And people were looking for that comfort and that stability. So I think the same thing around books for me. I do reread.
Well, Anne of Green Gables is one of the books that I have reread the most, and then Pride and Prejudice is the other book. But those are the only two comfort reads for me that I find comfort in whatever I'm reading, but I'll regularly go back to those two. Yeah. All right. Well, this was super fun.
Super fun. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.